Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to talk through how to draw deep test zones. So we've briefly brushed on deep test zones so far in the structure theory video, but just to quickly recap from the structure theory video, when price is, for example, breaking down, we know that when price is coming back to retest, most of the time people will look for this. They'll look for price to come back to retest this level and then continue down. But as we know, and as we've talked about in that previous video, price can retest all the way up to this start of the last structural push down, where the start of the push that broke structure down, and still be valid for a sell, because price can come up here. And if we then push down, we are still in bearish overall structure, because no price has been broken up. This start of that last structural push down has not been broken up. So therefore, we can retest anywhere between or from this level to this level and still be valid for a sell. And inside this area between them, because at times this will be a fairly big region, we will sometimes find deep test zones drawn from the 5-minute structure, and that's the key part, the 5-minute structure between these pushes here, where we might be able to take a sell from, in this instance, a sell, vice versa, of course, a buy, and still be valid for a sell, because as we see, this is still a lower high, so it is valid structure, keeping up that bearish trend that we've got here. So that is a quick recap on how to draw your deep test zones, or not on how to draw, sorry, on how structure works and why we have deep test zones. Now let's get into how to actually draw them with a few examples, because there's one way, but how we would use them is important to note. So this is our first setup. As you can see, I'm not going to go into the specifics of how to actually, of the setup itself. We'll get into that in the next set of videos with the setups and entries part of the course. But for now, we see we've got a level that was broken. We've had price push up, close with candles breaking this high here as per our understanding of structure. Now, when we want to draw our deep test zone, we would switch to the 5-minute and we'd look at the recent price between the start of structural push and the broken structural level. Now, the start of structural push, if I was to map this out, as we've talked about in previous videos, this is how we'd map out structure. The turning points, as we've talked about before, or slash the corners, are the structures. So this low is the start of the structural push that broke structure up, because this corner pushed price up, this higher low pushed price to break structure. Therefore, the start of the structural push is in these wicks here, it's this low. So the maximum price can retrace to and still be valid, as we know, is going to be somewhere in this region. For the sake of just educational, we'll draw it on with a big zone here, just in the wicks for now. We're going to adjust this in a moment. Now, when we switch to the 5-minute, we know price has to retest based on where the sonars. We know this low here is that start of structural push. So we are looking for deep test zones, we are looking for a region of 5-minute structural wicks between this level and this low right down here. Now, some people make the mistake of looking too far back. This instance, we know it needs to be from the start of structural push. So it's going to have to be either 5-minute structure that was broken up during this push up, or 5-minute structure that formed during the push. Because this is such a small structure, though, there isn't any. This is technically structure, but you can see it's already touching the level with this wick. So we wouldn't use that. There's no structure formed during this push up. So the only place we can do it is the start of the structural push itself. And to draw it, we would take our zone and we draw it on the wicks from the candle close to the tip of the wicks on that start of structural push. And this is the deep test zone of the start of the structural push. So this is the only place in this chart where you could have a valid deep test zone. As you see in this instance, price comes back to retest just the level and continues off from there anyway. So we don't really need to worry. But this is where the deep test zone would go in this instance. Now we're going to another example where price has broken this level down. As you can see, price has broken down. It has closed past the wicks. Now, this, as you can see quite easily on this one, is that start of the structural push down. If we mark out the structure again, this high is the high that pushed price down to break structure. So the start of structural push, as we know, is going to be somewhere up here. We'll just draw it on here for now. As I said, on the 15-minute, we'll adjust it in a minute. We know it's going to be somewhere in this high. So we go to the 5-minute with our deep test zone, and we can see this has actually been drawn accurately. This is the deep test zone of the start structural push because it is drawn from the candle close to the wick tips of our start structural push. Now, here though, there is a deep test zone elsewhere because as price pushed down, it didn't form any structure on the way down, but it did very clearly break 5-minute structure just deeper. Because if we draw it again, you can see we've got a very nice bit of clear, and wicked is the key part. We want some nice wicks when we're looking for our deep test zones between the start structure push and the level. You can see there's a really nice wicked area here of structure. It's structure because you can see on the 5-minute, it's clearly is structure, it's a low, and it was just freshly broken down by this push. And there are a bunch of nice wicks there. So we'll draw it from the candle close to the tip of the wicks. And now we'll see how when price comes back up, what was a setup that looked like it could be from initially the level, did not retest the level at the start, but actually went a bit deeper up to the deep test zone, touched into it, and then came down again. And this just allows us to be flexible between this region of the start structural push and the 15-minute structure level. Moving on to the final example here, and this is a more interesting one, or a bit more difficult one, should we say, which is why we're including it now. We've got price has clearly broken structure to the downside. If we were to mark on the structure quickly, we can see how price has clearly broken this low, and the start of the structural push down that broke this low, i.e. the high that broke structure down, or started the push that broke structure down, is this high. So for now, we'll draw on a zone, knowing it's going to be in these wicks somewhere. Switch to the 5-minute, and I can see to adjust this, the deep test zone of this start structural push, i.e. the highest area with the wicks, is here. So at the top here, it would be these wicks from the candle close to the tip of the wicks. I always draw my start structural pushes on as just a deep test zone. I never draw it anymore with a line. So for example, I would never draw it like this. I always just go with only the deep test zone of the start structural push, because for me, it keeps it extra simple. It means there's less levels to deal with. And I like entering it purely that most premium of price, I guess we could call it, at the top. So for me then, that is the deep test zone of the start structural push, i.e. that is my start structural push. Now, if you'll note, when price is pushing down here though, through this break, there is a lot of structure this time. Price is clearly, if we draw it on again, pushing down multiple times. This is all structure. There's also a lot of structure that was broken during these push downs because this was structure on the way up, it was then broken on the way down. So in this instance, how do we then choose which deep test zone to use? Well, there's a few things you can do to make it simpler for yourself, and some mistakes to avoid that many people at the start do tend to make. First off is don't look too far left, because yes, there are a lot of wicks over here, but this is older structure at this point. For example, some people might try and draw a deep test zone like this off these wicks. it's old. Look at how much price has pushed through this by this point. We want it to always be fresh and unretested. So similarly to the last setup, which I can briefly go through in a moment again at the end. Similarly to that, price had only just first tapped that level. So by this point, we're therefore looking at, if we were just to draw these out, this was a structure broken down, but it's clearly already been moved through. Price has already disregarded this zone. So no. Same down here, price has already sat on this zone. So no. The key part is now for us, we're looking at the fresh stuff. So we've got, this was a freshly broken 5-minute structural low, not been retested. This is a fresh 5-minute structural high, not retested. Same here. This is a 5-minute fresh structural high, not retested. But this is confusing. We've got a ton of levels here. So what I do when price is in a situation where there are a lot of potential deep test zones like this, there are tons, I simply strip it back and look for either an entry only at the 15-minute line, or for it to come back to the start of structural push deep test zone. And the reason for that is because price has got so many areas it can react from here. There's no way of knowing in advance which one is going to be the good one. I don't want to get into a situation where there's an entry trigger here, and then an entry trigger here, and then an entry trigger here, and I've taken 3 losses before there's eventually an entry trigger there, and there could be a winning trade. So I want to, in this situation, take away these and look for an entry either only at the level or at the start of structural push deep test zone. And when we move price forward, we'll see it comes up to the start of the structural push, and then from there continues to the downside. So in these instances, if it is confusing like that with lots of regions, just strip it back to look only like this. And then I'll also briefly just show again the difference between how many zones there were there compared to this nice setup we just talked through as well, where there's always the start of structural push deep test zone, but here there's also only one clear area it can be. Price freshly broke it, came out to retest it, and continued down. So that is how to draw deep test zones. It's also been more of a deep dive into structure and using the 5-minute and 15-minute structure with fresh levels. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next videos.